I'm very happy to have with me today Peppe Frana. Pepe, are we expecting a great, unique story and experience today?
Um, Let's hope so.
I am sure we will. Really glad to have you with us on Alnadi.
Likewise. Very happy to be here.
Yeah. So, Pepe, tell us about yourselves. Let's start from the very beginning.
Of course. Well, I'm a musician from South Italy. I live in a place called Cava de Tirreno, which is nearby the Amalfitan coast. For who doesn't know, it's the same region as Napoli, not far from
Hmm.
Pompeii, where the eruption happened. And
Hmm.
nowadays, I'm a musician specialized in stringed instruments from the Middle East and from the medieval Europe and from medieval Europe. That's how I would
Hmm.
define myself in a nutshell. So I,
Hmm.
I play a variety of plucked and bowed instruments coming from different modal traditions, including those which are nowadays dead languages, such as the various kinds of European medieval music, or some of them, of course.
Hmm.
And yes, that's what I do. I'm a composer from time to
So,
time, and
yeah.
a performer, meaning that I play concerts for living and I teach music.
Hmm. Very innocent story. So, how
Yes.
that came out to be?
Well, that came out to be mostly through the meeting with Ross Daly and
Hmm.
the community of musicians who orbitate around Labyrinth in Crete for
Hmm.
the first time. And not only
Yes.
that, actually, that was the lucky meeting that ignited the will to be a musician in life. Let's say, of course, this
Yes.
may have deeper roots, but I mean, through meeting Ross and through being a student of Labyrinth, actually, my my drive to be a musician was first ignited and then shaped in many ways.
Hmm.
Um,
Interesting.
so before that, I was an electric guitar player
Hmm.
without any particular project to become a professional one.
Hmm.
I was really into heavy music of different kinds.
Yes.
So I was playing heavy metal, I was playing hard rock and these kind of things with my companions in South Italy,
Hmm.
dreaming about words that didn't exist here, that belonged more to the Anglo-American
Hmm.
society, let's say. But we're trying to imitate that with our guitars in in garage and so on.
Hmm.
Um, and then then I eventually started studying philosophy at the university.
Hmm.
And I studied in a place called L'Orientale, which is a university in Napoli that involves courses on Oriental studies, basically. So I was doing a
Hmm.
quite ordinary philosophy curriculum, but then I was studying as well in Indian philosophy and Islamic philosophy
Hmm.
and history of the Middle East,
Yeah.
kind of things. And this I probably stimulated some kinds of curiosity for the East in general. No, I had this kind of exotic Orientalist
Yeah.
fascination in me.
Mm.
That pushed me to try to listen to the music of these places. So
Hmm.
suddenly I mean, I was browsing the internet, and back then we had, I mean, various ways to download music illegally, let's say, that
Yes.
that we were using, and I was just typing in these programs Indian music or Arabic music, and stuff was showing out that I would randomly try to download and listen, and the the sound that really struck me was the sound of the oud,
Mhm.
originally played by Anwar Brahem, the great Tunisian maestro who I think became.
Mhm.
I think was one of the very first oud players to become popular and also discographically distributed in the West.
Yeah.
Uh,
Mm.
I was very impressed by the sound of the oud and by his playing. Um I remember that this album that I listened to, I tried to recall these days actually which one it was,
Mhm.
but I'm not sure. But it was
Yeah.
mostly a solo album.
Mm.
So that was already a new listening experience for me to just listen one instrument.
Mhm.
I was used to listen to bands mostly.
Mm.
So I was listening to one instrument in a completely acoustic environment, and I was very impressed by it. I'd say, in my ignorance, that was the moment I discovered that acoustic instruments could make non-boring music. But, and and the sound of the instrument, the phrasing, let's say the melodies that came out of that musicianship, uh,
Mm.
I was very impressed by it. And so I just talked about it with my friends and I made it listen to my friends.
Mm.
It turned out that one of my friends knew what an oud was. He knew what,
Okay.
and he owned one actually. And
Mhm.
being, let's say, more skilled than me with finding stuff on the internet, he had also discovered that that someone was organizing seminars in Crete where you could go and learn the oud.
Okay.
So long story short, we decided to go together in 2006, and yeah, I ended up going alone actually because he didn't show up. After applying, of course, for the oud course, uh,
Yeah.
which in my mind would have been the Arabic oud course. I had no idea
Mm.
something such as Turkish oud existed, but that class was full that particular
Mm.
year, and so they put me in the Turkish oud one. And so rather
Who
run
was the teacher? Who was the
for
teacher
Arabic
for
oud,
Arabic?
I'm not sure actually.
Mm.
I'm not sure. I should. I have the sensation it was Nasser Shamma,
Okay.
but I'm not completely sure.
Okay.
I, I will check and tell you one day. I think that there must be an archive out there of those.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Anyways, you went to the Turkish oud
But I went to do Turkish one.
seminar.
I met your Daltokcan, who was my first oud teacher, my first and only oud teacher.
Did you have an instrument? Now you were doing hard rock.
Ah, yes.
You continued doing this music, right? Until you
Well,
were
actually,
exposed.
yes.
Yeah.
I continued doing this music, but I wasn't doing it seriously. Actually, I could play guitar, but I was studying guitar with a teacher. But I was on the verge of quitting
Hmm.
that particular moment when I discovered the oud, because I wasn't pursuing the dream of being a professional musician. There was no point in it, and I was busy
Yeah.
with the university. Uh, I was spending many days without my instrument in Napoli where I was studying.
Yeah.
So I was playing at home when I went back to my mother's place, but I wasn't playing much, let's say. Uh, and then when I discovered you, then this friend told told me about the semester. I went to look for one, and I
Yeah.
found, I think, the one of the few available lutes in Italy, which was a dreadful instrument.
Mm.
That apart from that, it also arrived broken in Crete.
Hmm.
Because I didn't know how to fly with the instrument, so it got damaged probably
Yeah.
in the trip. So it had issues when it arrived there. And Ross lent me his wood for part of the
Mm.
seminar, and that was also quite important for me. For him, it was very natural. I mean, I don't think he
So an Italian landed in
yeah,
Athens, came to Crete.
yes.
Who did you see when you came to Crete
The
to
very first
Udazzi?
person I met in Udazzi was Evgenios Vulgaris.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure he doesn't remember that, but I tried to ask him for directions, and
Mhm.
and I couldn't really speak English at the time. I mean, my English was very, very, very rusty. And not that now I'm speaking any kind
Yeah.
of Oxfordian English, but it's much better through the years,
Yeah.
because of the years of practice, especially there and other places abroad. So, but back then I could barely speak, and I met Evgenius, and I tried to ask him where the office was, and he just put two hands on my shoulder and said,
Mhm.
"There." So he was the very first
Yeah.
person that I met there, and then I discovered that he was also a musician, playing there, performing there, and eventually teaching there.
Yeah.
So then I went to the office and I met Ross, a couple of his dogs, and,
Mhm.
uh, and the people working there, who I'm sure you met as well. Stella, no,
Yeah.
Stella was there back then. Rena and
Mhm.
someone else.
Yeah.
And so uh, I was welcomed very warmly.
Mm.
Another comical detail. My baggage didn't arrive in Crete as well.
Mm.
So I went there with a broken wood. I arrived there with a broken wood and a toothbrush, basically. And I was 19 at the time.
Mm.
So they brought me to my room, where I met my roommate, who was an 17 years old Australian prodigy called Paddy
Yeah.
Montgomery, who took my broken wood, and I mean he asked he asked for it. Of course, he took my broken wood and played on it upside down, because he's a left-handed who's able to play the right-handed instruments upside down with a, to my ears, a very, very, very good knowledge of the phrasing, the ornaments, the pronunciation. So he was very credible to. He sounded like something that I would hear on these CDs that I was listening prior to
Mhm.
going to Crete. So I was a bit traumatized. So okay, this guy is the average student. I'm uh,
Yes.
I'm in trouble.
Yes.
Uh, but then the seminar started, and well, I mean, he was much above the average student, but still the level was reasonably high, I will say. I was one of the few total beginners, uh,
Mm.
and uh, and that was a seminal experience for me, because I couldn't read music, first of all.
Mhm.
I had no idea that Oriental music involved reading,
Yes.
but I couldn't read anyway because I was an electric guitar player playing rock and metal. Uh,
Yeah.
so that was, let's say, the first problem that I had to solve, try to understand what was going on musically there. Um, I was lucky enough to have enough, let's say, technical proficiency to be able to follow at least the technical part, which was a major part of the seminar, because Yurdal was really into exercises and explaining mechanics of the instruments and stuff like that. So that was relatively easy for me to follow, even if I couldn't do the actual things, but at least I could understand what was going on.
Mhm.
And the part related to the music, no. For me, it sounded beautiful, but it was completely mysterious and unachievable at the moment.
Yeah.
Um, so what I did, uh, but at the same time, I was really motivated to start learning the oud and start understanding about this music. So there was an element of frustration, of course, but it
Which
was,
is required. It's required.
which is required, yes, it's required. I mean,
Yeah.
you need to have the perception of the road in front of you, let's say, of the
Mm.
journey that is waiting for you to start, and
Yeah.
and that was very clear to me. I mean, it was very clear that I was really at the beginning of something that could have been potentially a very long journey, and it is. a very long journey.
Mm.
But at the same time, I was completely, and till today, I don't know exactly why, but I was completely convinced 100% that this was what I wanted to do in my life. And I
Mm.
guess it had to do mostly with the kind of impact that going to dates in that moment had on me.
Mm.
Because I could meet very different people, but all together uh, directed towards one learning pursuit,
Mm.
driven by I will say the pure wish to become better musician. So it was I will say a spiritual experience for me. I
Yeah.
don't yeah I can't find any other word. Not necessarily in any religious term, but as the experience of okay, there's something beyond me that's happening here, no, and I want to be
Mhm.
part of it.
Mm.
That-
Interesting.
And also, I will say that Yurdal, as a teacher, he contributed very much to this because he wasn't at all discouraging towards beginners. No?
Mm.
He was finding the time also to take care of you, even if you if you were I mean if you couldn't play most of the stuff that he was showing. uh, And
Yeah.
yeah, and he was very patient, very optimistic about the fact that that each one of us would have learned
Mm.
something at the end of the seminar. And for me, it was like that. It was a very frustrating and very positive experience at the same time. And
Mhm.
I fell in love with the oud. I fell in love with his playing of the oud,
Mm.
especially. I was very impressed by Urdal as a musician. I mean, for me, it was like witnessing, I don't know, Paganini, something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then but then it came the moment of after the seminar, the moment came to choose what to do, and I went to Ross and asked him if there was another seminar where the basics of of this music would have been explained, and he said
Mhm.
yes. I'm going to do a seminar about the basics of modal music in 2 weeks, so you're welcome to come. So I tried to find a place to stay elsewhere in Crete because there was a week in between, and it turned out
Mhm.
that actually the cheapest way of staying in Crete back then was to just apply for another seminar. So I
Mhm.
applied for the seminar that was in between the two seminars that I wanted to attend as well, and that was Tombak. So,
Mm.
see, so I took this Tombak seminar, which I wasn't even sure about what Tombak was when I applied. But that was also a very special didactical experience because the teacher Pedram Cavarzamini had a completely different style from Yurdal.
Yeah.
He was very serious. He was
Mm.
yes, he was very demanding.
Mhm.
At the same time, he was unbelievably generous. I mean, the lessons were never ending. I mean, after dinner, we were again in the class playing all the stuff, and there was a bond between his students that I was very impressed by. They all spent a lot of time together. They were changing the skins of the tombak all together. So I was also very enthusiastic about that, and it became one of my big loves to
Mm.
play percussion and to play tombak. And even if I don't do it professionally nowadays. Actually,
Mm.
I had to choose uh, between percussions and string instruments later. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's still I will say it shaped very much myself as a musician, and back then myself as a student also, because
Yeah.
um, it it required a level of discipline in many ways that of self discipline that I wasn't really used to in my previous
Yeah.
learning experience. And then finally, I did my first seminar with Ross, and I started to listen to these words, makam, seir, the names of the notes, uh,
Mm.
the music forms,
Yeah.
the the basics of modal music compared to let's say the Western perspective of music, and I think I had that was let's say the final step. That was the last piece of the puzzle that I needed to witness in order to be completely convinced, because now in front of me that was a Westerner who became
Mm.
so proficient in the styles of music that he could uh, teach them, of course, but he could also
Mm.
compare the various musical languages that he had understood, and the various music styles that he was presenting to us, which was mostly Ottoman music, Cretan music, Balkan music, and then his own music.
Mm.
And when it came to his own music, I was then I was done. I said, okay, that's what I want to do, because now not
Mhm.
only there is an element of diving into these beautiful music traditions, but there is also, let's say, an allowance for creativity in this approach.
Yes.
No,
Yes.
so you are
Mhm.
enabled also to do something new, let's say, um,
Yeah.
which I wasn't prepared for. Let's say,
Yes.
that was a surprise. I said, okay, now there's something different going on than just going there and learning a music tradition. Um, Something new it's happening in this place. I couldn't tell
Mm.
because I that was my only experience, but the sensation was very strong, and I was hooked, basically. So after that, I went home, and I
For
tried.
sure, after rescheduling your flight.
Yes, yeah. After scheduling my flight, I ended up staying
Yeah.
almost a month. That's the first time. So I went
Yeah.
home and I just started selling whatever I had, like guitars, amplifiers, and things, so I could buy a good wood, and I could go back there as soon as possible, and go visit your dad in Istanbul, and go and start my journey into learning modal music. And especially at that time, I mean, I understood that my main interest was the oud, of course, because I wanted to learn how to play,
Yeah.
and the repertoire related to it, which was Turkish makam or Ottoman makam.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. So now for the first period of
Mm,
Labyrinth, the first visit, let's say,
yes.
who did you meet in there? Do you recall the friends in there?
Yes. Apart from Evgenios Vulgaris, whom I met the very first week there, um, there were a number of musicians in Yurdal's class that then became um, that I used to meet every year. Victoria Tascu, wood player from
Mm.
Athens. Um, well, Yorgos Mavromanolakis was not among us anymore. He was in the
Mm.
he was in the first Yurdas class. Nikos Papaioannou, brother of Yorgos Papaioannou, who I also met that first
Mm.
year. The violin player, Nikos was playing the oud. Now he's mostly, I guess, a cello player, but he was playing the oud
Mm.
back then. Alexandros Papadimitrakis, also a very good oud player from Athens, was in Yurdal's class. Um, Christos Barbas, I think I'm not sure if I met him that first year or shortly after.
Mm.
The first period of Labyrinth is a bit merged in my in my memory,
Yeah, yeah.
actually, because there were a couple of actually after the first summer that I went there, um, Ross for the first time organized the the winter seminars in another part of
Yeah.
Greece. The winter
Mm.
seminars that I followed were in Lefkada, which is a small island in central part of Greece, which is connected. It's very close to the mainland. Actually, you can cross a bridge
Mm.
and go there. And they were organizing seminars there. So the following winter, I went to meet Omer Dogdular there for the first time because someone suggested me, look, if you want to learn Magam, this is the seminar you want to attend. And so I went there, and this is where I met Christos, Michalis Kolevas, whom you interviewed recently. A
Mm.
very nice interview, by the way. And
Yeah.
Stavroula Constantia, a very good friend of mine from Cyprus, who was an A player. And many Kelly, of course. I mean, Kelly was
Mm.
Kelly was a shock when when I listened to her play for the first time. In
Yeah.
yeah, and those were the years when I also met Efren Lopez. Uh,
Mm.
if not the first time I went to Dezzi, probably the second time. My first roommate, Paddy Montgomery, was a wonderful musician. Once again,
Mhm.
uh, Marta Mavroidi, we met in Udezzi in those early years, and Socrates Sinopoulos was there. Who else? I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot of people that
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
will
This
come
is
out
just
in this
to.
or in future conversations. But I mean, I guess it gives the sense of, I mean, not
Exactly.
yes, of the of the milieu that was hanging out in those years there. Well, not mentioning the teachers, of course, because then
Yes.
I attended seminars again with Domer Togdular, Murat Aydemir, um, Socrates, and Evgenios. Uh, Actually, I became quite an steady student of Evgenius seminar-wise
Mm.
for 3 4 years. I mean, I was trying to attend most of his seminars. And Omer was the moment I met Omer and started learning with him. For me, it became a must. I had to follow all
Mm.
his seminars for many years, and of course, I met his son Ahmed as well, and Ali Osman,
Mm. Yeah.
uh, who came as an assistant in a memorable seminar that we had in one winter or spring in that's where we learned the Ajamashinan Mevleviayin by heart in a week.
Wow. Wow.
That was the purpose
So
of
it
it.
was possible. It was
Yes,
possible then.
it was possible.
All
Uh,
right.
so yes, a, a big community of wonderful musicians that were united by this
Mm.
yeah, this communal effort of creating something, well, of, not necessarily of creating something new, but of becoming one with a certain musical language that for some reasons it resonated with us all, I guess.
Mm.
I
Yes. It's heaven, really. It's the new Istanbul, I call it.
well,
New Istanbul, where it's a cooking pot for musicians,
yes,
a culture, if we could say. And we see today how many musicians around spreading around. Those
yes,
who compose, those who play, invent instruments. And I don't know how much we can thank Rose and the community there.
yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, and well, I think his big intuition was that this music needed a new place, it needed a new context.
Yes.
That he himself was driven by the love and the interest for these music traditions, but I think he consciously or unconsciously he understood that the traditional context for these music traditions wasn't enough anymore for
Mm.
for new creative force to be ignited.
Yes.
No, it needed a context which was more open, probably less hierarchical in many ways,
Mm.
where even the teachers could express themselves in a freer way.
Yeah.
Because mean, this may sound a bit strong, but the musicians who came to teach to Labyrinth and perform to Labyrinth, that I then observed performing in their, let's say, home environments, in their more domestic environment, they were not the same musicians. They were playing differently in Labyrinth.
Mm.
So, and this was true for many great masters that I witnessed in the context of Labyrinth and outside the context of Labyrinth.
Mhm.
It's like there they had an allowance to experiment a bit more, or to, on one way, to experiment a bit more, on the other way to explore in a freer way their relation with their own music languages, let's say,
Yeah.
their own music idioms.
Mm.
This
And they
was
friction with others as well. They
an
friction
interaction, yes, the
with
interaction with,
other tongues and languages, other musical languages or dialogues
yes.
or
Uh,
dialects. Yeah. Yeah.
and also, the fact that they had an environment where they could interact with musicians coming from other music traditions. I think it also stimulated them. It
Yeah.
stimulated us all
Mhm.
to be a little bit more proactive in creating and in defying our own mental limitations, let's say.
Yes. Yes. Mm.
Other musicians that I met those years were for sure Haris Lambragis, another wonderful
Mm.
ney player from Greece and student of Omer de Gluar. He was doing a free improvisation seminar.
Mm.
And I was I never took part of it, but I witnessed many of their final presentations, which were, I mean, it sounded more like contemporary Western music to me in many ways, but infused with this modal atmosphere. So you had a bunch of musicians who were freely improvising after a week of training that. Okay,
Mm.
this is something that you don't see in environments
Traditional context.
where, let's say, traditional music genres are practiced. And
Mm.
I think that also, even if it was completely out of context sound wise, with the rest of the music that were played and presented, I think that left an impact as well
Mm.
in all us students at the time who were listening to it, because
Mm.
there was this dynamic between tradition and freedom that was always in place in whatever was
Mm.
happening there. Uh,
Mm.
that I think for me personally, that was what kept me there, because
Mhm.
otherwise I always struggled with having to do the correct thing. I always
Yeah.
struggled in my life a bit with authority. I could never really fit into any specific, let's say, discipline. So
Mm.
the fact that,
Pippi, yeah. Go ahead. Go
no, no,
ahead.
no, just the fact that there was this tension between the people reminding you that you can also be free, and people teaching you the correct way of playing uh,
Yeah.
a vichara, or
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
what, this is what really made the difference for me between
Mm.
any other learning experience that I had previously or later. I could see that for a number of reasons that was the place where I could become a better musician.
You belong.
And I belong there. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, eventually, you became an instructor in Labyrinth, but For how many years you were visiting Labyrinth? What music genres did you come across or
So
encounter in
I
there?
started going there in 2006, and I think I went there regularly for at least uh, 7 or 8 years, I will say,
Mhm.
before taking a break. um,
Mm.
and mostly I was studying with my Turkish teachers there, so I was regularly visiting Yurdal. I was regularly visiting Omer and studying with Ross as much as possible. But then in the meanwhile, I had discovered Afghan Rubab
Mm.
uh, through Ross, because that was one of the instruments that I listened a lot. That was
Yeah.
one of the sounds that struck me more in Ross's music, because especially in a certain stage of his production, he was playing a lot of Rubab. He still is, but
Mm.
there are a lot of very beautiful, let's say, Afghan Hindustani sounding pieces of him that I liked very much back then. So I got a Robab. Actually, the first Robab I had, Ross sold it to me, and I started taking the seminar as well with Daud Khan Sadozai. Uh, that's where I saw Evgenius again after that first week in Labyrinth, because in the first seminar of Daud Khan Sadozai, I think we were the only two students, if I'm not mistaken. No,
Mm.
we were three students. So it was me,
Mm.
him, and a friend from Caribbeans
Mm.
taking
Mm.
part in the class. And so that was another very important learning experience, because there I could get a grasp of what meant to study an instrument in the so-called traditional way. So in a completely
Mm.
oral way, with the teacher sitting down on a carpet and and telling stories, and without a lot of explanation, with a lot of imitation going on. Uh,
Mm.
and that was, I would say, the first kind of music that I was exposed to that had no analytical part or theoretical part in it. Uh,
Mm.
so to try to explain things theoretically, or to try to ask theoretical questions to the teacher, it made no sense for him.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
that was shocking for me at first. But then I could see that, especially Evgenius, who was, I mean, evidently more aware than me, that this was the situation. I mean, he could he was he was more comfortable, let's say, with this attitude from the teacher, and then that made me feel okay. Then I should be as well.
Yes.
And it worked. It worked. And Robab was the other instrument that, together with the oud, I'd say I studied more seriously from those years onwards. So that
Yeah.
was, I mean, one more week in Crete added to the calendar. So I was there every summer, and I went there every winter as often as I could for
Mm.
7 8 years. And then
Mm.
actually, when I started working with music a little bit, it became more difficult for me to go there in the summer. So for a few years I didn't go, and then I went again
Mm.
as a teacher in I think 2015.
Yeah. And but you were going to other places as well, like
I was going to,
Istanbul and
yes, I spent
yeah,
time in,
tell us about these things and the
yes,
other genres that you explored
yeah.
further.
But no, mostly actually it was written in Istanbul. In Istanbul, I was visiting the teachers that I had met in Crete from time to time, and I was well. The first time I went there, I was a bit disappointed because, I mean, of course, the other special thing about Labyrinth is that you could spend all those hours with these people. No, that
Yeah.
when you met them in their own environment, it wasn't the case. But still, I mean, I had my place in Kadikoy, where
Mm.
um, my hostel, where I could
Yeah.
sleep, and then I met many musicians there, and I could have uh, I mean, I could grasp a little bit the native environment, at least, of the music that I really wanted to learn.
Hmm.
I was surprised to understand that the community, in those years at least, the community of musicians who were seriously interested in learning classical Ottoman music was rather small
Yeah,
in Istanbul as well. It wasn't like a popular thing. I I imagine it was a little bit like classical music in Italy, for example, where okay, you have a large community of musicians studying that, and but no, I mean, I struggled to find concerts to listen to. When I
yeah,
found them, they weren't as exciting as I expected.
yeah,
Or not always, of course, but in some cases. And the teachers were busy, so
yeah.
I mean, I lived the city a little bit, but I wasn't. I mean, I couldn't count my staying in Turkey as a very important learning experience. It was, of course, it was fueling, let's say, my interest for the culture, for the let's say the human environment and the life of the teachers of the professional musicians there as well. Uh, but most of what I learned it in Crete, to be honest.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
I'm still very fond. I have very fond memories of the time I spent there. I have very fond memories of visiting Omer in his shop. I have very fond memories of visiting Murat in his office in Kuchukali back then.
Mm.
Uh, but and of course, I mean, looking for instruments, going to the instrument makers, going to Faruk Turuns, going to Ramazan Shalai back then, and tambour makers. Um,
Mm.
so, I mean, it was very important for me as a life experience in order to, okay, now I'm experiencing, let's say, the context and the place, the geography, the atmosphere
Mm.
of where the music I want to learn its let's say native, but
Yes.
it wasn't the same thing as being together with all the other students in Udezi
Mm.
and studying for a week with those teachers. So
Interesting.
yeah, and
Interesting.
actually it made the difference more evident between the time that I was spending in Crete and the time that I was not spending in Crete. Uh,
Mm.
because somehow I'm again I'm not sure about the psychology involved here, but
Mm.
somehow the time that I was spending in Crete it was a suspension of everything else. So there was
Yeah.
no ordinary life going on anymore. It was just
Mm.
you, the people around you, and this mysterious object that you called music
Mm.
that you were trying to get closer and closer to.
Interesting.
In all the other places, including Istanbul, including when I went to visit my Afghan Rubab teacher, Daud Khan, in Germany, which I
Mm.
went several times in those years. Um, ordinary life was still there, you know. There was still stuff going on that in a way distracted me or in a way disturbed me, let's say.
Mm.
uh, I couldn't shift my mood in the same way that happened when I was in Crete.
Interesting. So maybe it's a good time now to see some of those memories and some photos.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah. And then also share a piece
Of course.
or a recording that you would like to share with us and you tell
Yeah.
us about it. What would you like to share with us?
The recording, you mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. Should we start from Asemaye?
All right. Which makam?
Let's go. Let's go Bestenigar.
Bistinagar.
Yes.
Would you like to tell us about this composition
Oh,
before we listen to it?
yes. It's a semi I wrote for
Mhm.
a duo album with Christos Barbas
Mm.
that we published in 2018, I think, or 17. Not even sure anymore. So
Mm.
this is part of an album called "Such a Moon the Thief Poses to
Mm.
Sing," which is a Japanese haiku,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
it means there's such a beautiful moon that even the thief needs to pose, stealing stuff and look at the moon. And
Yeah.
actually, the title was decided before finding its meaning. But then the moment we decided, we found a meaning for it, and we said, okay, the moon is the music tradition that trying to trying to understand and learn, which is in this case Makam, because me and Christos,
Hmm.
we met again in those very early years around 2007 or 8 in Greece as students of Omer Dogdular, and then shortly after we started playing together
Yeah.
as a duet, and we were practicing the classical pieces that we were learning with Omer and that we were listening in this duet formula. So we said, okay, the moon is this beautiful music that we were exposed to, and we are the thieves that we
Hmm.
are trying to steal. We are trying to steal something from it and trying to make it ours. So the album is dedicated to Magam music, actually, and it includes mostly um, compositions in classical forms, so semis and Peshrevs, and some dances as well that me and Chris has composed in various magams, and this is a Bestenigar Satsemai that I composed.
Wonderful. We'll listen to it then and come back. Pippi, that was wonderful. So now let's go to the learning experience. You told us about your exposures and encounters of all this kind of modal music genres and the masters and the travels, the collaborations. We got some insight now
Yes.
with this listening. Now, I know that you went through other genres as well, like Radif and so on.
Yeah.
That came when?
That came that came in those same years, a bit later, I will say.
Hmm.
And first of, I mean, firstly, I wasn't, let's say, um, I wasn't interested in learning on a practical way these other genres like Persian Radif or Azeri Mugam especially or Hindustani music. Um, but I mean, I was exposed to those in Labyrinth because I was listening to the musicians there, and I wanted to understand how they worked. Uh,
Hmm.
so my approach at the beginning was a comparative one. Actually, this is not
Hmm.
completely true because it came a point when I was studying Afghan Robab at first that I said, okay, I need to understand a little bit more about in Hindustani raga because Afghan
Yeah.
music, it's I will say, well, maybe it's not right to say a branch of raga music. Well, it's raga music, Kabuli music, let's say. In
Yeah.
particular, it's a branch of the wider family of raga music. So it's very much
Hmm.
related for historical reasons, for geographical reasons as well, with music from North India, Pakistan, and so on. And it's raga
Hmm.
based, meaning that it shares with the Hindustani music the nomenclature of the ragas. It shares the solfege, the sargam, so it uses sargama padani as the name of
Yeah.
the notes. So the underlying musical system is the same as Hindustani music. Of course,
Yeah.
the musical content of the modes sometimes differs from
Hmm.
the Hindustani relatives. But I wanted to explore a little bit this relationship, so I wanted to know a little bit about Hindustani music to then go back to Robab and
Hmm.
and try to understand more about this music system. So I started
Hmm.
with a man in Italy called Gianni Ricchizzi, who's a sitar and vina player, uh, who spent many years in India from the 70s onwards, and then moved to the same region where I was living at the time, which is Umbria. It's in a place in the center of Italy. So I was taking lessons with him, and as
Hmm.
well with Daud Khan. So that was my first, let's say, other music model tradition that I was exposed to, and that I studied quite seriously. I mean, I didn't become like a Hindustani music expert. I would say I'm an expert listener in raga music,
Hmm.
and I can let's say perform my version of it with the Afghan, which is blended with the Afghani raga that I studied with Ustad Daud. Um, so yeah, that was my first, let's say, experience in learning a different music system than Ottoman Magam. And then in later years, actually, I started studying as well the Radif, a little bit with Yasamin Shahusseini. This is something
Hmm.
that happened much more recently because my first learning experience with her was during the pandemic.
Yes.
Yes, so when she did an online seminar and I took place and she brilliantly exposed me to the basics of the Radif, exposed us actually, all the
Hmm.
students, to the basics of the Radif in a way that I hadn't experienced before, in with such clarity, let's say, and
Hmm.
ease also, because this is one of the secrets of I will say the successful pedagogy in modal music. You should make things sound easy because they are. most of the time, at least conceptually. Then, of course, to
Yeah.
make them sound good, it's another subject. But conceptually,
Yes.
for the first time, Radif and Persian music was a bit demystified, let's say, for me.
Mm.
To,
Yes.
through Yasamin, and then I said, okay, then I should go on and know more about this. And so I took some private lessons with her as well, and then I didn't go through the whole repertoire, but at least now I can tell that I know how it works, no? And that in many ways that was my goal, to
Mm.
understand how the system works. And then, more or less at the same time, a bit later, I started studying Alzeri Mugam as well, with an online teacher, Berat Boniadi.
Who's he?
He's,
Ah, okay.
he's an tar player from Tabriz who lives in
Mm.
Istanbul for a bit now. I think he's back in Iran. Again, very good teacher, and it's still pursuing a more, let's say, traditional pedagogy based on imitation and in learning the melodic formulas of Mugam, but at the same time, I mean, it's very um, it's very much able to analyze them and to abstract from them the music concepts which are not only a pre-composed melody, no?
Mm.
And so yeah, it's an interesting learning experience, and it, in a way, I will say it's helping me as well with the understanding of Middle Eastern Makam.
Mm.
Because I mean, in the meanwhile, I also studied a little bit the Arabic Makam. Um, this is something that I was always trying to avoid at the beginning because it would it will confuse me, and it will contaminate, let's say, the purity of of the Ottoman Makam that I was trying to learn. And then, but then, it comes the moment, when you start learning this kind of music. I guess it's a common experience for all of us Westerners that you want to really become a proficient speaker of a certain music language, and you want to be indistinguishable from a native. No, this is the let's say the
Mm.
first dream that we all have at the beginning when we start learning this kind of music. You want to play like them, no?
Yes.
And then it comes to the moment when you understand that you either will never really be able to become a native speaker because you just are not. And so
Yes.
even if you become very much proficient in a certain language, musical or verbal, uh, you are still thinking, let's say, in a different language, no?
Mm.
And this makes a difference in the way you express yourself, even in a language that you learn how to speak very, very well. Uh, and then also because it makes no sense at the end of the day, no? Because there's
Yes.
no, first of all, there's no them, there's no there's no music traditions which has this level of homogeneity that you can really say if someone it's let's say it's a purely exponent of the tradition. It's a pure exponent of the tradition, or it's something in the middle. No, I mean, there are individual differences. As the more you learn about how to listen to a certain music tradition, the more you are able to spot those differences between
Yes.
among musicians.
Yes.
And also because, I mean, the place of someone who started to learn a music tradition that is not native of, it's a different position. And well, I always felt, let's say, the responsibility of not indulging in any form of I hate to use the word, but of any form of appropriation of this
Mm.
music tradition. So I always wanted to make it clear that, okay, I look at this stuff a little bit from outside,
Mm.
not because I'm not part of a certain ethnic group or cultural or religious group, but just because this is what my life experience was. I arrived there
Mm.
later in life with a different music background, and what will come out, it's a mixture between what I learned and what I
And that will add
yes,
to the richness, actually. This is
yes,
how
and to that
richness
tradition.
comes.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Interesting.
and this actually, I would say, facilitated um, the fact that I was interested in different things at the same time. I also had the examples of my great predecessors, no, and Ross and Efren and Evgenius and all these uh, voracious multi instrumentalists who who
Yeah,
try to
yeah,
learn everything of everything, no. So
yeah.
there was also an element of imitation that I wanted to be one of those people. Uh, so yeah, yeah.
Now, medieval music.
Oh, medieval music.
Mm.
Medieval music came because a music group from Italy. Well, first of all, actually, a friend played a role in medieval. He was the first one who made me listen to medieval music. I had no idea that medieval music was a thing before he started playing some uh, for me in Crete, or I don't remember how it happened, but I mean he was involved somehow.
Yeah.
So I
He
wanted,
corrupted you.
yeah, so I wanted to learn some of the tunes that he was playing, and
Yeah.
I think he even gave me some scores back then or something like that. So I started practicing some of these tunes without a precise project of becoming a medieval musician. But what happened was that a music group from Italy called Micrologus
Mhm.
um, was looking for someone able to play the oud, because they were using the
Mm.
oud in some of the programs that they were presenting, and their former oud player passed away. One of the
Mm.
founding members of the group, a musician called Adolfo Broeg, who was one actually of the pioneers of the oud in Italy, was one of the first people who started using the oud actively and performing on it, not playing any kind of Middle East repertoire, but at least trying to play the instrument properly in medieval music in this case. So I was contacted by one of the members of this group. They were looking for a oud player. I started performing with them, and actually that was, to be honest, the beginning of my, let's say, professional career as a musician, my professional life. So I could sustain myself playing the
Yeah.
suddenly, because before I was okay. I was playing around. I was trying to make a living as a musician, and it wasn't happening very much because the so-called world music scene in Italy was a bit difficult at the time, or at least I couldn't find my place into it.
Mhm.
But with medieval music, it worked immediately. So I
Mm.
moved to the place where these people were living, to be close to them, and I started playing with them regularly. Uh, I still do play with them, and in the meanwhile, of course, I fell in love with the music, with the repertoire, and so
Mm.
I wanted to know more about it, and I also started playing the, let's say, apart from the oud, the proper medieval plucked instruments, meaning the plectrum lute and all the family of the
Mm.
guitars and the citals. And I went to study medieval lute in Basel, Switzerland,
Mm.
with a musician named Crawford Young that I met through them. Um, so I really fell in love with it. I was
Mhm.
especially with the, well, that was my reconciliation with Italian music in many ways, because
Mm.
the kind of medieval music that I love the most and that I still love the most is the music from the 14th century in Italy. which is
Mm.
a very special segment, a very special repertoire
Mm.
of European early music. It's a style that only survived for a couple of generations and then it disappeared into something else, basically. And
Yeah.
this always fascinated me, and I always found a strong relation with the kind of music that I was learning before in Crete, especially because it involved a small, well, at least a small survived repertoire of monophonic pieces.
Mm.
So of monody, which is modal monody, uh, in which I could, like, if nothing else, apply some of the general music concept that I had found in Eastern traditions, especially in the way, for example, you accompany a singer with oud.
Mm.
Actually, the music example that I suggest you for medieval music, it's me accompanying a singer in one of those
Mm.
monophonic pieces. So
Mm. So we can listen to it maybe in the next
maybe you
break.
can listen to it. Yes.
Okay, I would like to ask you about now all this diversity of learning, exposure. Maybe you tell us how many instruments you are playing,
Ah,
right? Now, this whole thing happened. You came very hungry and like a beast who is considering himself a beginner, absolute beginner,
yes.
and going into all these kind of genres with different approaches to teaching. A
Mm,
teacher doing a technical thing, another one not to talk about theory at all.
yeah.
It's just an imitation.
Yes.
Some analytical one from all these geographies and timeline. How was that learning? I mean, how did you consolidate that learning?
I'm not sure I even did, actually. I'm not sure I consolidated it in a conscious way. I think in many ways I found myself in a learning experience that was, it was a little bit like studying in the university where you took different courses, different classes, but with the idea that finally those they're all converging in one big learning experience. So at the end you get
Yeah.
your degree, let's say, for me,
Yes.
Labyrinth was that. I mean, it was never about let's say Ottoman Makam or Afghan music or something. In my mind, that was one big learning experience. It was driven by the idea, because actually all these exists in the shape it exists,
Mm.
because behind it there's the idea that all these music languages converge at the end. They are, let's say, regional varieties of one
Okay.
way of thinking about music.
Mm.
So I
Yeah.
couldn't express it in words back then very much, but it was clear to me that everything was like pointing in sorry, in a
Yeah.
precise direction, and everything was
Mm.
part of one learning experience. And I even, in a way, it was natural for me to embrace different instruments. For sure, at the beginning, I was more focused on one music style and one instrument. Uh,
Mm.
that was actually explicitly suggested to me by Ross. Uh, he told me, "Look, be in one pair of shoes and then walk around." And this made sense for me in many ways, looking back to it, because actually, the if you learn one modal music tradition, uh, let's say you learn Makam,
Mm.
so you learn Makam and then you get used to analyze the modal structures, the modes, the Makams, whatever, as sequences of these small fragments that can call Jin, Ajnas, we can call Chechny, whatever. So what are those? Those are bunch of few notes that also contain an information about how these notes behave melodically, no? So they are repertoire of phrases that you can associate with one name, and you put
Mm.
them in sequence. and then you have something which has a very defined musical atmosphere, and then we call it a mode.
Mm.
So you get used to look at whatever modal structure is put in front of you in this way. So even when I was learning the ragas, for example, from Ustad Daoud, for me the ragas were broken into segments, into phrases, into
Mm.
areas. Mm? I'm not saying this is necessarily correct, but at least, I mean, I had the experience of getting the analytical tools, let's say, from a given tradition, and then things can make sense in my head using those tools. So I could recreate, say, years, let's say, for
Mm.
things that didn't belong necessarily to the music traditions in which Sair is a word.
Yes.
But the functioning
Yes.
of these concepts was applicable to these other music
Mm.
traditions. And I think you can do
Mm.
the same thing in reverse. I mean, you can
Yes.
you can think about the alap of Magam Beyate, no? Because if we mean for alap the succession of the melodies, no,
Mm.
that you must present in order to envelop to develop, let's say, the path of a certain raga in Hindustani tradition,
Mhm.
at least, no.
Yeah.
So you can also look at let's say a Middle Eastern mode, a makam, as a sequence of melodies that are that
Mm.
that are more or less predefined, let's say. And
Mm.
Radif, it's a different concept as well. No, it's again a sequence of micro compositions. Some of them are metrical, some of them are non-metrical, some of them have a rhythmic pattern behind it. Some of them are non-related in terms of intervals with the previous ones, so they involve modulations.
Mm.
And when this happens in Makam music, for instance, let's say in I don't know in the second Hane, we have Karshiar in Makam Mushak.
Mm.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I don't want to get technical. These are just
It's
examples. So,
okay.
but the second Hane of Ushak Sasemai, we get Karshiar. So for us, this is a modulation. So we are invoking a different Makam.
Yeah.
If you think Radif wise, this is part of the extended picture of of Ushak, let's say, no? Because
Mm.
in I don't know in Mahur in the Radif, then you have some gushes that modulate, meaning that they change the set of interval in which they work, but they're still considered to be part of the
That's
melodic part of the dasga, no?
mm.
So for me, it
Yeah.
wasn't. It was very much about crossing music materials, saying, "Okay, this makam sounds a bit like this raga," or vice versa. No, it was more about crossing the concepts that the various
Mm.
pedagogies of these modal traditions brought with them. That made the game more interesting for me. So to
Mhm.
learn a variety of stuff for me was just a way of enriching this palette of mental tools, really, to understand
Mhm.
this kind of music. And then, of course, I mean, I, I felt authorized in Labyrinth
Mm.
because this was offered to me in terms of courses. I felt authorized to take whatever I liked, and I
Interesting.
just took
Did
whatever I
you
liked.
did you feel the urgency of learning or the start you said in the start that there was like challenges
Mm,
encountered.
yes.
Later on, did that cool down, or you still continued in the urgency of, oh, I need this and I need to put an effort in that now, need to deep dive into this?
Oh no, in many ways it cooled down. Now I don't feel anymore the urgency. Well, when I started learning this music, I had this big this let's say this feeling of being late in life. because
Yeah.
I was 19, and well, in Istanbul I witnessed children studying with Murat Aydemir. I remember especially there was this child who was playing was very well, and I was a bit intimidated by the fact that I was much older and I was still a beginner. So for sure that created a sense of urgency and I will say a positive frustration, if you want to call it like that. So
Mm.
I was obsessed with practicing. I was obsessed with learning, and I had some gaps that had to be filled, because when I went there for the first
Mm.
time, I couldn't read music. Um, I was way back, let's say, in the process of becoming a proficient musician. So yeah, but now um, I guess on a personal level, I really enjoy the feeling of being a beginner at something. So I still
Mm.
start to learn new stuff. Uh, Now, for example, I'm learning the lira with Kelly. You can see, you can see a
Mm.
lira back there, and
Yeah.
of course, I'm not good at it. It's the beginning of a new journey, and but the function that it does for me is mostly to keep the interest alive in a
Yeah.
way that only when you are at the beginning of the journey for something it can be alive.
Mhm.
This is, I think,
Mm.
is true in life for many aspects of one person's
Mm.
existence. So sometimes you just I just need a new spark, and a new spark for me is usually a
Yes.
new instrument. I have to admit that, and or a new style of music, or a new subject that I want to learn, and this, I guess, is the main reason why I still pursue this multi-instrumentalist approach, not because it's particularly efficient, let's say, in terms
Mhm.
of how many instruments you can really learn in one life,
Yeah.
but in the other in another way, studying various instruments teaches me stuff on the instruments that then let's say I play for living, and I play more
Mm.
often, and I can express myself better with especially the oud, the robab, and other plucked instruments and the medieval ones. Um,
Mm.
Yaeli Tambour taught me something on on how to play the oud.
Mm.
Uh, Lira is probably telling me something about how to play the robab as well. It's a process of also of detaching yourself from both technical and musical habits that playing only one
Mm.
instrument uh, inevitably brings you to develop. So
Mm.
to start something new, for me, it's also a way of breaking those habits and adding something to my musical vocabulary that I wouldn't find necessarily in the practice of one particular instrument.
Yeah.
So I will say it doesn't need to consolidate. For me, no, it needs to
Yeah.
be a little bit chaotic because I like it. I like it like this.
Perfect. Now, if you summarize your learning experience, what is it that worked actually that made Pepe Frana? The learning style or the approach that worked?
Um, Two things. Um, the first one for sure is the focus on the physical experience of playing that I always needed uh, in some extent to enjoy learning.
Mm.
So the technical part, that especially your dad represented in those early years, that was what created an emotional connection with the instrument of the oud that I really needed, because it
Mm.
brought me back in my learning in my early years as a teenager trying to play Metallica
Yeah.
or Maiden. No, because actually what that was for me in many ways was a kind of music that I couldn't play immediately when I picked up the instrument. That it required some kind of technical effort, some kind of obsession with trying to perfect something on the instrument. So that element, I will say, it worked a lot with me pedagogically. And then on a more refined, let's say, intellectual level, this idea that this is a big science of how to make a melody that works, that was perfected within many centuries in different parts of the world by people who weren't necessarily connected among them in throughout, let's say, all their history, but they still created ways which are translation one of the other of creating these beautiful melodies that I was really eager to learn, actually. My first years in Labyrinth, for me, it was like my occupation was harvesting melodies. I was all the time trying to learn new pieces because I was fascinated by the complexity and the beauty and the rhetorical perfection of these melodies, that they could really bring you from one place to the other, no? That I couldn't find in any other kind of music. As a guitar student, let's say my big limit was harmony. I still don't have a very developed harmonic ear. If a kind of music has too many chords, you lose me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, melody was what really I could find an emotional connection with in all my, let's say, experience as a music listener since I was a child, and I was listening to the music that my parents were presenting to me. Till now, that's my thing, and so I was exposed to this fact that in a vast area of the world, musical languages arose in order to codify and refine the science of making a beautiful melody, and this is what at the end modal music was for me. Very clearly from day one, and I was really fascinated by the functioning of it and the way that theoretical explanations in those various places try to describe it.
Interesting. So that's a great insight, actually, and I think the philosophy years in the university were not wasted.
Well, not wasted.
So it's
I'm
it's
glad to
embedded
hear that.
practically now.
I'm glad to hear that.
Okay, Pepe, I think you mentioned the medieval example
Yes.
earlier. Shall you please shed some light on it so we can
Yes.
listen to it with our audience?
So, if I'm not mistaken, the piece that I sent you, it's called Che ti giova nascondere il bel volto, and it's an Italian ballata from the 14th century. It's one of the early monophonic pieces that we find in Italian medieval music, and it's sung by Enea Sorini, who's a colleague of mine from Italy that I play with very often. And it's a duet, me on the medieval lute and he's singing. And it's love poetry from Italian Ars Nova.
We'll listen to it then. Thank you.
tuas nessun può dir quanto sia preziosa, ma chi la vedessi la loda con più t'ascondi più desio mi mena. Donca non voler più ch'io porti pena. Amor per ti servir lo cor m'ha che ti giova nascondere bel volto.
So, Pippi, now you briefly mentioned the role of a non-native, right? Especially in identifying yourself, or maybe understanding what identity would you carry. Taking the examples of Rose Efren, or maybe going back to Kantamir and Aliovki.
Yes, of course, yes.
Right. So this, I think, gives freedom, right? Being exposed to many repertoires, many instruments, many regions, going also to the medieval European
Yes.
music. Tell me about, what does this reflect in you as a musician today?
Well, on a personal level, I think for me it was also it was always about trying to understand things that I perceived as far away in space or far away in time for medieval music, but still far away from me, and
Yeah.
and try to explore the way that those things actually still mirrors in the life experience that I have as an individual, as a human being in this time, in this place. On a more general level, I will say for me it was the experience of finding an environment in which a music that in my previous perception was very much ethnicized. Okay, because this was Arabic music, this was Turkish music, this was Persian music, whatever, Indian music, and then finding out that this ethnic dimension was actually there mostly because of a Western superimposition, or let's say, I will say, a political agenda. But in truth, that wasn't there, because you mentioned Aliufki and Kantemir, no, two Westerners who gave enormous contribution to the history of Ottoman music. we could even, I mean, we don't need to bring Westerners in the discourse to demonstrate this. We can talk about, I don't know, Farabi, or
Yes.
yeah, someone who was born in Central Asia and died in Cordoba, no?
Yes.
Or
Zuriab.
Ziryab, yes, or
Urmawi, Abdul Qadir
Armawi,
Muradi.
yes.
Yeah.
All of these great figures of the, let's say, the primordial mixture that created of these musical languages, they were cosmopolitans.
Mm.
Some of them, they were geographers as well. Some of them, they provided us with maps,
Yeah.
the world, and description of the music. So the way this musical language on a more in a more extended picture was created was already multicultural from the beginning and multi-ethnic.
Yes.
This even if it makes even sense to talk about ethnicity anymore in those parts of the world. So, but for me, this wasn't clear because I was exposed to the way, actually, the way the West marketed music from the East, which was the music seen with the glasses of world music, let's say. So the way those music traditions were marketed, they were marketed in a very much ethnicized way. So you can listen to music from the Arab world, you can listen from music from the Iranian world, blah blah blah, with a big stress on the differences between these musical languages and no mention at all of the similarities. No. And I mean, this was true when you went to a 10 concert. This was true when you went to a CD store, for instance, or when you, I don't know, listen to, again, world music productions, or even when you read articles from musicologists in Italy or presentations of concerts, the stress was always on the singularity of a certain music genre, on how it was particular and really related to a certain place, a certain traditions that went on for thousands of years, and blah blah blah. And this was completely reversed by my practical experience in Labyrinth.
Yes.
And this was, in a way, a positive shock. On the other way, it was confirming a little bit of a suspect that I had for the way that non-European music traditions were presented in the institutional and non-institutional environments that I was went to see, let's say, before going to Labyrinth. No, in my very initial quest for someone to explain me a little bit of how this music worked, and mostly Westerners that I met, they were really, really, really eager in portraying themselves as a purists of one specific style brought on by one specific master in one specific place, and stuff like that. And I think that this is a dysfunctional heritage of some forms of Orientalism that we still bring with us. Now that we want to see only the particular. We only want to see the small picture. We only want to see the little regional thing, because then we as Westerners, we are the ones that can that can be in the position of the universality. No, we look everything from outside, and so we can distinguish between the little varieties. And in music, this is very true. I didn't need that. I needed I needed something a little bit bigger in many ways in order to ignite my enthusiasm. Because
Yeah, this is like
I wasn't interested in the music of a little village in Anatolia. Honestly, for me, I mean, in order to catch my interest, I needed something a little bit more universal, more complex, and
yeah,
the picture that was provided to me by being a student of Labyrinth was immediately the one that, look, these music traditions are interconnected. I mean, no one was telling it. It was blatantly clear. It was there in front of my eyes. When these people were playing together in the final concerts, when Ross was inviting Iranian musicians and Turkish musicians to play together, when he was playing together with them, or Kelly and all these people. So I mean, you could not negate that. That was not fusion. That was the same music. It was the same
yeah,
music.
contemporary model
Yes, that
music.
was the same. Not even contemporary. It was the same music pronounced differently by different, let's say, speakers. Who, of course, they had their differences. They were bringing their own insight, and they had their own perspective on the same subject. And they even had different music materials, but they were sharing, let's say, a zero level of communication that for me was uh, the most exciting thing to see.
Yeah.
In all of
That creates the borders. That what creates the borders. Yeah.
yeah.
Otherwise, as you said in the past, people used to travel, even though it was difficult back then, and they were communicating, and things were by nature of
Yeah,
the same sort.
yeah. I mean,
In addition to what you have said earlier, specialization, like Ortega criticizes,
I would yes.
versus being a polymath, where we describe the nature of being exposed to too many things, not only music itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, which creates an open-minded, an in-depth personality where creativity is much easier, creation, comprehension, everything.
Yes,
Yeah,
look, I
yeah,
think that I will say for any kind of musician, even if you play a completely different style of music, nowadays, I mean, 2025, it's just irresponsible to be ignorant of the music of other cultures.
yeah,
It's irresponsible because it creates a divide between what it's normal to be learned, and then what it's only there for the people who are interested in strange stuff. But it's not, this is not the case anymore. This is not the case anymore.
interesting.
Everybody needs to be at least alphabetized about the fact that music in some other parts of the world is conceived in different ways. And this is what I was exposed to. I mean, nothing else. Then I had the choice of going deeper in one particular music style and then learning that. But that was because of my personal taste. It wasn't.
Mm,
It was like forced on me in in
yeah,
in any way. And other students of Labyrinth, I mean, they took different roads. They studied different things. They specialized in different music styles, but most of them, they share this mentality, let's say, and this predisposition of mixing up these things. And now the beautiful thing to see for me in more recent years is people coming, like Yasamin Shassini, for example, or Nagar,
mm,
or some of the brilliant students from Turkey that appeared during the last years, or some of the Greek students as well. So
mm,
those people coming from traditional music environment as natives, but then embracing this more open perspective that that environment provides. So,
Yeah.
for example, last year I was in Catalonia and I took part as a student of a seminar that Yasemin and Ross held together, comparing Magam music and Radif. And that was great to see. I mean, that was great to see a young, extremely talented player. She's one of the very best oud players in the world, in my opinion, right now.
Mm.
Trying to proactively, let's say, breaking the boundaries of her own music traditions, and actually as well of the pedagogy that she was exposed to. Huh? So
Mm.
trying to do something radically new with it by doing the obvious things, by doing by just having a look at what the neighbors are doing, few hundreds
Yeah.
of kilometers west. And
Interesting.
so I think this is something that I mean, this is a merit that must be acknowledged to Ross at first. The people in Labyrinth, I will say, I mean, I will proudly say asshole as a community of people that gravitated around Labyrinth. That I mean, each one in its own proportion has been promoting, no, this kind of
Very interesting.
attitude.
Mhm. Very interesting. Pepe, now you have experienced these genres and these instruments. What are the fruits that you can bring up for our listeners about practice, the effective practice?
Can
I'm
can
sure you have seen different ways of
hmm.
you know obtaining proficiency on a certain language, if these languages or instruments and so on. So what is it exactly there that's a common factor for practicing this music and obtaining a skill and a way of expressing it?
Oh, I would say, look, the big lesson that I learned as a student of modal music is that you should practice this music as, first of all, as if the modal materials, as if the modes, the magams, were
Mm,
real things. Okay, so a
mm,
magam basically it's something that you pro or mode in general, rag or whatever. It's something that you
mm,
want to bring into reality with your playing, knowing that it's out there somewhere.
mm,
Okay, so you think about Ushak, for example, and you have a mental idea of Magam Ushak, which is shaped with all the repertoire that you have studied, all the beautiful taksims of, I don't know, Necdet Yashar or Niazi Zayin or Yurdal or all the great masters from the past, Tamburi Jamil Bey. So
mm,
you have all these sounds in your head, and then you want to reproduce something which is coherent with those,
mm.
and you act as that's out there, no, in the clouds, like a platonic idea or whatever, and you want to bring
Yeah.
it into reality. So you are forced to find a way to recreate that musical atmosphere, that rhetoric, that tension that it's there, and this forces you to, in a way, to invent a new way of doing it, because
Mm,
just by the fact that you are a different person from all the others that tried to play Magamushak and that became your reference, this forces you to be creative. This forces you to be. One should never forget about that. That this music
mm,
is about a communal effort of
mm.
a collective effort, rather, of a community of people that created together a musical idea, a musical concept that then they called Magam Ushak or whatever. And
Yes.
in order to become part of it, you need to add your little spark of creativity as well within it, which is inevitable because you are not Tamburi Jamil Bey, you are not any of the recordings that you listen to, you are just yourself trying to blend that makam. So this is for me the thing that should always be present in any kind of learning experience of someone who wants to study this stuff, that do as if the makam is out there, it's a real thing, even if then it's only real the moment you make it sound. So there is always this tension between something that is the tradition that you want to reproduce in the more correct way, let's say, and the fact that in order to do that, you need to make something new. So the thing that I would suggest to anyone who wants to study any kind of modal music is, first of all, relax. I mean, you're not going to sound like any of the great masters of the past. You're not going to be anymore, let's say, part of a human environment which doesn't exist anymore. You are not going to perform for any sultan in the near future. But what you can learn from this, from the experience of learning a modern music tradition, is the fact that there are ways to be free and be creative as a musician in the pursuit of becoming part of something which is outside of you, which is the mode in this case, or the makam. I don't know if this is too.
It's clear, yeah. But now on the technical, no, it's perfect. This is really interesting. On the technical part, what do we do? For example, we want to learn the Aili Tambur. We want to learn the oud.
Apart from the mechanical part, which is, I mean, obvious, because you learn how to move your fingers here and there. Well, what you do is basically you relate a repertoire with something which is a non exactly part of a which is not composed, which we call the mode of the makam. In other words, you learn pieces and you understand what these pieces have in common in the way the melody works, and then you distillate from these pieces the essence of the melodic behavior of the mode. And the other thing that you do is you learn how to pronounce the music, actually. So you learn what we wrongly call ornamentation, no? Which is the pronunciation of a certain musical style. So if you want to learn Ottoman Makam, you need to learn all the technicalities of how make a certain phrase sound credible within the ways music phrases is pronounced in a given musical tradition. And this is very important for any modal tradition, because we tend to see, as Westerners especially, we tend to see ornamentation as a separate subject. So you first learn the phrase without ornaments, and then you put the ornaments in. But this is like saying that, I don't know, if I say, like an Italian will say, "The dog is near the window." There's not English without ornaments, you know. This is mispronounced. This is mispronounced English. Like the one I speak anyway. So you need to consider these idiomatic elements of the music as part of the melody, and not as something that you add to the melody. And this is very important. But I will say the most important thing is that the more universal thing that I can think about, given the technical mechanical part, when you learn modal music, you need to have an idea of how in a certain music tradition the composed part and non-composed part interact. Because we have this distinction between composition and improvisation, let's say in the Western perspective, so
Yeah.
on music, let's say if all the musicians that have a Western background, they will say that they either improvise or they compose. And then they will say more, let's say, poetic things like, okay, but improvising, it's really composing on the spot and blah blah blah. But still, I mean, it's something that we consider as two completely separate practices, to the point that there are musicians which are only improvisers and musicians which are only performers of composed music. No, we have musicians who don't improvise in the Western world, no, because they don't do it, and we have musicians who only improvise in the Western world because they don't struggle on learning any music. But the boundaries between these two practices are blurry in modal traditions, and they're blurry in different ways in different music traditions. And there is always, let's say, a spectrum between what is completely improvised and what is completely composed, and all the music in all the modal traditions is always in between the spectrum. Because you can say a semi by I don't know, Aziz Dede is completely composed, but is it true? I mean, you have the how is it the English word? The opening track of your podcast is the Ras Tatios semi, no?
The Sasamai Mahur,
Tatios,
Nikolaki.
no? Sorry?
Nikolaki's.
Nikolai.
Yeah.
The Mahur one then.
Yes.
And I thought it was the Tatios.
Yes.
But yeah, so the Nikolaki Mahur Sasamai, it exists in the Arabic world, it exists in the Turkish Ottoman world. Every time it's played, even within the same music tradition, something is changed in it. It can be a little ornament, but that's enough to bring that specific piece of music one step down on the spectrum towards the completely improvised side, no? And then if we look at how it's played in let's say in the Arabic style rather than in the Turkish one, then you have elements of intonation that changes, and then you have very specific idiomatic elements in the way the phrasing is conceived that change. So it's moving further on the spectrum between the towards the non-composed part, because now you have a variety of interpretations of the same piece of music, which changes severely. I mean, if you change one note in a piece by Bach, no, you will get executed. But then you can do stuff with this music which are completely crazy for the standards of, let's say, Western classical music. Now I'm exaggerating, you know, I'm saying obvious things, but you get the point. So you cannot really say that this music is completely always composed or it's always completely improvised, no? But the way these two practices are interact is the key to understanding, I will say, any modal music tradition. So
very interesting.
Yeah. So this is something that I will suggest to any student. Interrogate yourself on what is Taksim revealing, for example, about a makam that composed music is not, and vice versa. If you study Hindustani music, find a moment for yourself for analyzing the compositions that you study, and then understand how those can shed light on various parts of the alap of a certain raga. Learn one peshrev and make a taksim out of that peshrev. Okay. This kind of exercises are the one that I find more fruitful in terms of the musical growth of a musician who wants to study this kind of music, and of any musician actually. I mean, I think this is something that that even someone who's practicing other kinds of music should consider exploring, because this is the big lesson to be learned from any kind of modern music tradition. Even if you don't want to become super proficient in Ottoman Magam or Hindustani Raga or Radif or whatever, just the experience of being exposed to this kind of pedagogy, and if you are able to really focus on this interaction between the written and unwritten, between the crystallized and non-crystallized, this will make you a better musician, in my opinion, by itself.
Interesting, very interesting. Pepe, I think we need another example to listen to. What would you like to suggest?
Maybe we can play the talking about improvised and non-improvised. We can play as much as you want of the piece called Vritti, which is contained in an album I did with Ciro Montanari, who's an Italian tabla player, and Masi Karimi, who's an Iranian tambour player who lives in Italy. But this piece, it's a duet between me and Ciro, and we're playing, let's say, an Afghan sounding like version of an Hindustani raga, which is not played normally, I will say, in Afghanistan, which is Rageshri. And yeah, so it's let's say it's a more Hindustani sounding performance, but with Afghan robab and tabla.
We'll listen to it then.
Yes.
Thank you. I think we hit into comparative studies and experiences, but this would worth actually another interview
Yeah,
to go dig deep, maybe with yourself alone or maybe with a group of other friends
that would be nice. Yes.
and other masters where we can discuss this in detail. But I'm sure you came up with certain conclusions or synthesis about what are the core common factors that makes us understand all these kind of modern musics, or maybe extend even to the medieval.
Mm.
From a theory perspective to somebody who has experienced this and uh, started the making and data music, actually composing, improvising, using the instruments, working with others who speak these languages or dialects. So, what are those conclusions or
Well, I wouldn't call
yeah,
them conclusions. Actually, conclusions would be
the temporary conclusions?
well, my temporary conclusions are the following. First of all,
Mm,
uh, when we talk about music theory,
mm,
we need to decide what theory is and how the notion of theory applies to modern music.
mhm,
Uh, the the way we think about music theory, I'm generalizing once again, but the way we think about
mhm.
music theory as in 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 the, in the world of Western music, let's say,
Yeah.
it's mostly a prescriptive way of conceiving theory. So theory is something that tells you how music works and what you should do.
Mm,
So in terms of I'm really generalizing here, but just to make the point, you study classical harmony, you are told avoid parallel fifths and stuff like that. You are told this is
mhm,
the voicings of the chords that you need to use. These are the functions. These are the cadences. So these are the tools. Now make music. Um, you study, let's say, classical jazz, bebop, vocabulary. You are told these are the chords, these are the scales that works on these chords, these are the sequences, these are the common patterns, this is the vocabulary, blah blah blah. Now go make music. So these are forms of prescriptive theory, uh, which in many cases, let's say, in especially in the Western world, they are not presented as idiomatic. So the way you learn music theory as a student of Western music, they tell you this is the way music is made. They don't tell you this
mm.
is the way music has been made in the court of Vienna, or this is the way music has been made in the US in the 30s and 40s or whatever. They don't add no this chronological or geographical element to it.
Mm.
And this it's already um, let's say an element of disturbance in one's perception of other kinds of music when later in life
Mm.
or she would encounter different kinds of music, no? Because
Yeah.
then it will create a confusion by itself, because then you will try to understand with the criteria that you had before these other kinds of music. But regardless,
Mhm.
then what do you have generally, let's say, as theoretical efforts in the world of Eastern music traditions? You have classical theory, historical theory, going back to the Middle Ages and the systematists and, and all those people. And those were people who tried to explain music in mathematical terms, especially following the philosophical Greek idea that music was a incarnation in the physical world of numbers. This is stuff that you find in the ancient Greek philosophers. This is stuff that you find in Boethius and in the medieval theoreticians, and then you also in theoreticians of the Muslim world as well. This is an attitude that this research, but this has very little to do with practical music. No, this was more of a philosophical investigation of the place of music in the cosmos, and it was more of a investigation of the notion of harmony. No, why? It's a big philosophical question, and it's still a scientific question in many ways. Why things that sounds good? No? This is what these people were interrogating themselves on mostly. But okay, this is a theoretical effort that has nothing to do with, or very little to do with practical music. And then you have these theoretical systems that arose in more recent periods in you have the ones that arose in the 18th and 19th century, like Radif, for example, and then you have these new theoretical constructions that arose post-Cairo Congress, let's say, that try to translate, let's say, traditional ways of learning this music in more Western-like, let's say, terms, graphically with the scales or the tetrachords or the pentachords, or conceptually again with the octave scales and the reduction of the terminology. So you have these things that present themselves as prescriptive, so they should be tools that you absorb in order then to make music, but they are really translations of descriptive efforts, of traditional ways of organizing the materials in things that then made sense to remember. So for me, this was the first important realization about the way theories, let's say, in modal music are conceived. That the moment you think that those are attempts to tell you what to do, let's say, you forget that the main purpose of all this terminology, of all these tetrachords, of all these names, of all these words that we use was a pedagogical one. So those were systems that were shaped in order to create things for the students to remember. And this is the way traditional pedagogies exist in many other fields. When you have a name, which is an arbitrary name, that incorporates a number of informations about, in this case, what the melody does. So you have the word Hijaz that you get used to associate with a number of specific music gestures. Okay, this is not a theory. This is a mnemotechnique.
Yeah.
Okay. When you have something like the Radif, a Radif, it's a collection of things that are supposed to be played all together. A mode in Persian music is basically a collection of things that sound good one after the other, or combined in a specific sequence. What does it mean? They sound good. They sound good according to the taste of a community of musicians that operated in a certain historical moment that then became the canon for the following generations. Okay, so, and the way it's organized to be taught in that way. So it's a pedagogical system. It's not a theoretical one. This is the point I'm trying to make. Sorry, with my poor English. And this is the same for the underlying, let's say, structure of the theoretical construction in Middle Eastern music, in Arabic and Turkish Ottoman. the tetrachords, the pentachords, what traditionally are called cheshni or ajnas, those are basically the same. I will say the same category of things than Goucher in the radifs. So they are a bunch, a segment, let's say, of musical ambitus, so a small fraction of a larger, let's say, range of notes that also have in them a melodic identity. They also have in them a hierarchy between the notes that also have a sequence of tensions and resolutions that repeats over and over in the written repertoire in those Middle Eastern traditions. So, for example, you have radif and you have makam, no? Which are not the same thing. I mean, they arose in different moments in history. They actually, radif especially, it's supposed to have substituted makam in the practice of the Persian court music at a certain point in history. There's a very good book about this specific subject. I have an amnesia about the name of the author. The title of the book is "Music of 1,000 Years." Let me Google it because I don't want to not give credit to the author. Sorry for this. I have a noisy keyboard.
Now you give an indication that you are a gamer.
No, that I'm a bit. She's Anne E. Lucas. Very good read about this historical, let's say, interchange between makam and radif in the Persian context, especially. So you have these two systems, which are not the same thing. The musical content, okay, there are similarities, but it's basically different. The names, okay, there are names that exist here and there, the nomenclature, and this just represents the fact that there was a cultural osmosis between these two words in the past. And it's obvious, we all know about that, but they are not the same music.
Yeah.
But regardless of the musical content, they have two complementary perspectives on how modality works in general. Because in radif, you are exposed to a bunch of pre-composed melodies. So what, let's say, the pedagogical aim of that system is to tell you, look, you need to learn all these melodies. Forget about scales, forget about abstract ideas about music. Just digest this melodic material, and then in many years, let's say, you will be able to spit out your own version of it, let's say, after having digested it. And I mean, this I will say it's a brilliant way of making it work, especially if someone starts as a child. I will say that, I mean, nothing else is needed if not the exposure to the repetition of this.
It's like learning natural languages.
Yes, it's like learning a natural language. Of course, the danger of it is that it can bring to a level of rigidity in the repetition of these melodic formulas. And it can appear, if you stop looking at it as a pedagogical tool and you look at it as a prescriptive theoretical system, and then this is Iranian music and nothing else, and what it's in the radif, it's in the radif, and all the rest it's forbidden, then it can in time bring to rigidities. Makam, on the other hand, I mean, it suffered, or let's say it gained the attention of Western trade musicologists that created this para-Western music theoretical construction that tried to represent, I would say, also a little bit the freedom that you had within it, because the fact that they created these abstract concepts of makam as sequences of tetrachords, and the tetrachords were represented not as collection of phrases, but as a set of intervals, music intervals, let's say. This also, I assume it represented the fact that they they recognized a level of music freedom that those music traditions were bringing with them, and they would say, okay, they are thinking as in a more modular way, so they have the basic element of this music are these music fragments, and they can create different shapes and sequences. This is why historically many makam arose within the history of Ottoman music, especially because, okay, sultans were paying for it, but anyway, the system was there to create many combinatory possibilities for these basic elements, and then therefore many makams and many possibilities for modulations within makams. Okay, because then you don't only have a large number of makams, but you have within a single makam you have a enormous variety of different years that different composers in different moments of history explored. So it is a way of looking at modality which is more open, let's say, and in which the basic material is a little bit more abstract. These are the notes, these are the basic phrases, but then do whatever you want with those. Okay. Of course, here the danger is confusion. It's not rigidity anymore. It's confusion, and it's let's say overgrowth, and this is in a way what happened, especially in the Ottoman music system. Now that you have a ridiculously large number of makam, and then very few are actually put in practice, especially nowadays. No, there are many makams which, well, I mean, in the last years I've seen many young people playing also Veraknak and Rahat Ulerva, and I'm very happy about that actually. But let's say the generation of musicians that I studied with, I would say they concentrated on, at least in my observation, they concentrated on a smaller number of modes. And it's also true for the Arabic world, if I'm not mistaken. So, but then, okay, then you have these two things, these two, let's say, perspectives on modality, that regardless of their content, of the tradition that they represent, regardless of the musical content, they say something different about what a mode is. Radif says a mode is a sequence of melodies. Makam says a mode, it's a sequence of intervallic microstructures, whatever you want to call them, that allow you to combine them in different ways. Now you can use the lenses, let's say the glasses of Radif, to understand makam a little bit better, and I would say in a deeper way, because then you consider a certain makam as a collection of melodies that also include modulations. So when you study, once again, makam Husseini or makam Mushak or whatever, you make your own Radif, and then you have the beginning of Ushak, the Daramad of makam Mushak, and you say, okay, which is the opening phrase that it's recurring over and over in the repertoire, and you observe that it's not a phrase in Ushak, for example, but it's actually an interaction between the Duga and Ra. So you have La, So, La, or you have So, La, La. You have this relation between the notes, and you say, okay, this is the Daramad of Ushak, no? And then you follow with Radif mentality, and you say, okay, which are the important gushes, which are the ones that the melodic episodes of the makam that all the time are there and they're really defining it, no? And Ushak, for example, it's what happened around the 4th degree, no? which they call buselik now, even if it doesn't have the major 7. No,
Yeah.
I like to call it beyadi because it's what happened
Old name.
Makam beyadi at the beginning. Okay, getting
Yeah.
technical once again. I'm a nerd, but then on the other hand, you can look at the radif with the analytical tools of Middle Eastern, Arabic, and Turkish music tradition and say, okay, this is the Daramat of Mahur, but what it's saying in terms of how the intervals are used, which are the tensions, which are the relationships between the notes. So you are able to abstract informations that allow you to not fall into repetition of the same melody, let's say, over and over and over again. I'm not saying that this is what happens in Iran or in Turkey, no, because the musicians there, especially when they start as children, they don't have this problem. They don't have this problem. Naturally, they will, in most of the cases, if they are, let's say, moderately talented, and they will find their way to create. But I mean, imagine what would happen if they would from the beginning, let's say, they would be exposed in a more creative and multimodal pedagogy. No, I think it will be useful in general.
Exactly.
At the same time, I mean, the people studying Makam, regardless if they are from Turkey or from Brazil, it's useful to have an approach that involves the learning of some specific melodies. And this happens naturally if you are studying this music traditionally from a young age, because you study the repertoire, and that's your radif actually. No, you study I don't know 5 semis in Makam Ras, and the beginning of those 5 semis becomes your opening of Makam Ras when you improvise or when you compose again. But you can create a shortcut by having a more, let's say, Persian perspective on this thing, and trying to isolate melodic motifs or movements that really define a certain moment of the makam, and organizing them in a way that makes you that makes it easier for you to remember. So this is,
So you
I would
become
say,
independent and free.
yeah. So this is the kind of interaction that I became a proponent of, let's say. Where,
No, we can't get enough of this actually. We will need to have a dedicated discussion on this.
sure, we can.
But I would ask you, you teach, right? You taught in Labyrinth
Yes.
and you teach today, maybe online, maybe in person. Give us a brief about your teaching activity as well as your style.
Oh, what I taught in Labyrinth now for many years is a seminar called the Modal Perspective, which is actually it's related to the subject that we are talking about now. It's an introduction to modal music for people having a Western musical background. So it's basically, I will say, a collection of the shortcuts that I would have liked to be exposed to when I was a student. So
Yeah.
it's basically me saying the things like I would have liked to have heard them from my teachers. No, and not that I didn't, but I did, sometimes I just didn't from the beginning, but because of the nature of the seminars, because I was the only beginner. And so it's just, let's say, a crash course about which ideas you need to understand before starting to learn anything about any modal tradition, and which ideas you need to abandon before starting to learn any kind of modal tradition. And that's what I do. And then it's very practical. I make the students play a lot, examples of repertoires, and then over the years, I defined a series of exercises for improvisation that I think are very useful from the beginning. Also because I like to even people who are not super proficient with the instruments, I like to make them again this word improvise from the very start. I will say to make to bring them in contact with the non composed forms that exist in modal traditions such as taksim, alap, shakl in Afghan music, avaz in Persian music, and so on. So the idea that you can do that, or well, you can simulate that. Let's say you can simulate the attitude, which is the most important thing, because then the idiomatic content you need to learn it with time. So you are not going to play a perfectly credible taksim. But if you just force yourself from the beginning through a series of exercises to think about what you're doing in terms of the development of the mode and the things that you need to do and the sequence of the start of the important steps, let's say, of the melody, and blah blah blah, this already puts a musician of any level one step further, acquiring the right attitude, let's say, for then learning this music properly. Also, taksim and general improvisation in modal music, something which at the beginning, before I went to Labyrinth, I was exposed to in a very mystified, let's say, shape. So no, this is something that you will learn in 20 years. This is something that yeah. So I was listening to this kind of this. No, you need to, I don't know, play the repertoire for half of your life, and then maybe you will be able to play a lap or taxi. So these, I always found it disturbing, and I could tell that the people who were talking like this, they were usually Westerners who, at their own turn, they were exposed to this kind of attitude by other teachers. And I don't see the point of doing that, actually. I much prefer, well, I find it much more useful for a beginner from the start to get in touch with the various musical attitudes that you need to have in order to achieve this music, and then you will eventually become good with practice. No? There's nothing.
Very interesting. Do you pick certain repertoire at a certain time,
Yes.
or you go like diversified
You mean in terms of styles?
with students? Like, do you go, for example, with the Ottoman or Arabic or Radif, or maybe you diversify in the same seminar?
A bit of all of that, actually.
Mm.
Because it's also very important for me to expose the students to the differences between the various modal systems.
And they
And
catch up later on. Yeah.
Sorry?
And they catch up later on. So
Yeah, of
because
course.
it needs time.
Yeah, I mean to get. I don't go into details. I don't go into details too much. I mean, I present them the details, but that's not the point of my specific seminar. I mean, they can go to many other amazing teachers to learn the subtleties of a given musical style. But it's for me the point is to point them, let's say, towards the right perspective and the right attitude as learners to then understand what's going on in other styles.
So you teach them how to think, how to make it work. Yeah.
Well, it's not only about how to think. It's much about how to. It's much about, yes. I mean, partially it's how to think. Partially it's about the fact that you need to think about what you're doing before doing
Yeah.
it. Also improvisation.
Yes.
And part of it's I mean, also predisposing yourself to dealing with conflicting information sometimes, no? Because and to, I mean, abandon
Stereotypes.
Yeah, stereotypes and the need of having a completely coherent theoretical overview about the music, and
Mm.
also abandoning some musical concepts, like for example the octave scales, let's say, which is something that you need to forget about when
Mm.
you at least when you learn Magam or Radif music and these kind of things. But it's much more about being exposed to variety of pedagogical styles, okay, and being able for the students then to choose later what they want to dig deep.
So you push them into water and let
Yeah,
them swim a little bit, and then
and then of course, I
yeah.
mean, and I don't even focus, on details too much. I mean, on details like intonation, for example. I try to take away all the idiomatic elements that relate to one specific music traditions or the other. No, because these are the things that also differ more rapidly among different music
Yeah.
traditions. Because if you listen to, I don't know, Algerian music and then you listen to Moroccan music, the intonation is radically different. And you go to, I don't know, you listen to Tunisian Malouf and they have another microtonal nuance. Then you listen to music from the peninsula, or you listen to music from Libya or Egypt, and they have different intonation. Not to mention again the way Turkish magam or Iraqi magam, it's has its own microtonal flavor.
Yeah.
So because when people coming to my seminar, they're always very curious and very inquisitive about quarter tones, and they have this. No, they use this word a lot, and microtones
Yeah.
in general. And it's, I mean, the first shock to them is to expose them to the fact that look, intonation. It's not. First of all, it doesn't have much to do with the single notes. It has to do with the phrases. So you learn how
Yeah.
to tune the relation between the notes, and this is true for any music tradition that involves microtonal nuances.
Mm.
And apart from that, it's something that you really need to learn the way you learn the pronunciation of a foreign language. So by listening and by getting used to certain sounds, and with time and practice, it's not something that you can learn within a seminar, and it's not useful for you to learn if you are not completely sure that that's the music that you want to learn.
Mm.
Because if you if you make too big of an effort in trying to learn one specific way of tuning the second degree, let's say, of Makam Bayate, this could even become detrimental if then you want to then later you choose to study, I don't know, uh, Turkish music, and then the second degree of Ushak has a different, let's say, microtonal nuance. So before learning this kind of idiomatic elements, you need to learn what is this all about, let's say, and then you pick up a music
That's
tradition, and then you become proficient in it, and then from there you can move on. That's at least my own pedagogical approach
interest-
with the people
interesting.
with the people I teach.
Interesting. So how can people reach out to you for teaching?
People can reach out to me, I guess, through social media nowadays, quite
Mm.
easily, and then they can reach out to me in any of the seminars that I will be teaching in the next future, I will say.
Mm.
Now I have one scheduled in Spain, in an early music festival, but which is called Early Music Morella, close to Valencia. But this is happening. I'm going to teach modal music there, introduction to modal
Yeah.
music, and then hopefully I will be teaching in Labyrinth again soon, and
Great.
teaching privately in Italy, uh,
Mm.
and I'm teaching at the conservatoire as well here.
Interesting. Interesting. What other activities do you do, Pepe? Like overall?
Apart from being a professional musician,
Yeah, like maybe concerts.
no, yes, I
Are
play
there
concerts.
projects, teaching? What other things Yeah.
I play concerts with different music projects, both in the field, sorry, of modal music and medieval music.
Mm.
I teach, I organize didactical events here in Italy. I'm actually, let's say, the responsible for Labyrinth Italia, which is the Italian branch of Labyrinth. And we are doing one event each year in Siena, a beautiful city in the center of Italy, in Tuscany, in collaboration with an important music institution here in Italy called Accademia Chigiana. So each year we invite teachers from the Labyrinth Cosmos to come here and teach. And that's it. Actually, this is what I do in my life.
Yeah.
And
And
then
you turn to your instruments and compositions and
yes, and then I compose for the music projects that I'm involved in from time to time. And I try to understand more about the things I do every day.
interesting. And continue learning new stuff.
Continue.
About your albums, where are they located? Do you have a website? Are they on the
I don't have,
streaming?
I don't have a
Mm,
website yet.
mm.
Like a number of musicians of my generation were a bit reluctant about websites because we came from the era of MySpace, I guess. So we
Yeah, before Facebook. Yeah.
before Facebook, and then we got absorbed in the social network madness. I guess
Mm.
that's why many people don't have a website. But I should make one.
You
My
don't
albums,
need one
my
actually.
albums
Yeah.
are my albums are all in published in the streaming platforms nowadays. So they are there.
Mm.
My most recent one is the one with Chiro and Masi. It's called
Mm.
Soma, and it's an album of contemporary modal music, meaning that it's mostly our compositions and then arrangements of the music tradition that Masi represents, let's say, which is Kurdish Magam, Kurdish
Mm.
Iranian Magam. Very interesting and rich modal tradition, actually.
Wonderful.
And that's my most recent one. My previous one, it's an album I did with an electric guitar player as a duet. And so I still try to do collaborations which are a little bit outside of the field of
Yeah.
the music worlds that I'm naturally involved in. I enjoy doing that. So yeah, my music is out
Wonderful.
there. If you Google my name, I guess, or if you look for my name on Spotify or YouTube, you can find
Yeah,
it.
sure. I invite the listeners and the viewers of Alnadi really to
Thank you very much.
go into your realm actually and enjoy the experience. Before we conclude
Yes.
for this first interview with you, Pepe, what would you like to share with us? And then you maybe before we play it, we have to hear a conclusion for this interview.
Well, we can play the Hudzams SMI that I sent you,
Mhm.
which is one which is not released on any album. It's just a home recording that I did that,
Mhm.
and it's published on YouTube on my channel. And this is
Mm.
something that I want to do more often, actually.
Mm.
Start publishing music outside of the context of music projects of an album. And this is an old composition of mine that I play on rebab, Ottoman rebab, a bowed instrument,
Mm.
and frame drum, and it's a piece I wrote a few years ago,
Mhm.
and I just published it now after finding it on on my hard disk rather randomly. Uh, and it's an exploration of a traditional form, which is Ottoman semi, uh, on an instrument I've started learning only recently,
Mm.
but it's actually the piece that I forced myself to compose a piece on Rebabu when I picked it up, and this is what it came out. And yeah, it's
I'll
a
listen to it.
Satsema in Makam Huzam.
Mm. I'll listen to it. But before we say goodbye to our viewers, we would like to hear a conclusion from you after all this really interesting discussion.
Well, I'm not sure I'd like to conclude. I mean, this is a conversation that I would like to continue ad libitum, because we can. I have the sensation
It's
for
it's
hours.
really
But
great.
I mean, the conclusion it's basically a wish of going on with this discussion together with you and the other friends that you brought together in this format of yours,
Mm.
that I was a listener of. And yeah, I will just conclude with a feeling of gratitude, not that this interview gave it to me, towards you, first of all, because it
It's
doesn't
my
happen very
pleasure.
often that I can talk about these things, and towards all the nice memories actually that this conversation brought with it. Because in my life, nowadays there's not a lot of room for nostalgia, let's say. But this was a good dive into
Mm.
those very important years of my life. So let's let's just find a moment
Yeah,
to be grateful about what life brought us,
and more to come.
and more to come. Yeah, hope.
More to come. Thank you very much, really, for accepting my invite. It was
My
really a
pleasure.
great time with you.
Thank you very much.
And thanks for our Nadi viewers. We'll meet again then.
We'll meet again.